By this edict they were declared to lie under a perpetual anathema, to be adjudged detestable heretics. And not only they, but all that showed them any favor or countenance were denounced as worthy of the severest punishment. The bishops in their dioceses and the inferior clergy were enjoined to search for them, and if they found them persisting in their heresy, they were to deliver them over to the secular power. If the person apprehended was a clergyman, or had concealed himself under any religious order, he was to be deprived of all church office and benefice, and delivered to the secular power to be punished, unless he should voluntarily return to the Catholic, popish faith, abjure his errors, and make suitable satisfaction at the discretion of the bishop of the diocese to which he belonged. And if he was a layman, unless he abjured his heresy, he was to be left to the sentence of the secular judges and receive condign punishment according to the quality of the offense. Should any refuse to swear, and here a footnote, a similar measure was employed against the martyrs of Scotland in the persecution under the infamous Charles II, such as refused the expurgatory oath, being held confessed, as it was termed in those bloody times. The Waldenses refused not to swear in a scriptural manner when there was a weighty reason, but because they objected to unnecessary oaths and refused to appeal to deity in the superstitious manner practiced by the Church of Rome, they were slandered as refusing to make oath in any case, just as the Covenanters have often been and still are when acting on the same principle with the Waldenses. This was held sufficient to convict them of heresy, and they were to be proceeded against as if fully proven guilty. Persons of influence in the places where they were scattered were directed to discover and bring them to punishment on pain of being excommunicated and having their properties confiscated, and themselves dealt with as heretics. Of the effects that the promulgation of this horrible decree had on the churches of the Waldenses, we are not fully informed by the historians of that period, but it is certain that vast numbers, especially in the south of France, fell a sacrifice to the execrable wickedness of those who planned and executed it. One consequence is deserving of notice. Like the primitive Christians, the Waldenses were scattered abroad by persecution. They carried the truth with them, and their zeal for its propagation remained unextinguished by the spoiling of their goods and the exile from the country of their birth to which they were subjected. Wherever they went, they bore with them the torch of gospel light, and the countries to which they were driven had a portion of the moral darkness which rested upon them dispelled, and found them true to the Christian character to be the lights of the world. The valleys of Piedmont were at this time exempted from the persecution which wasted other abodes of the Waldenses, and large numbers retreated thither for safety. Bohemia, Spain, Italy, Germany, and Britain furnished them asylums from the rage of the persecutors, and received from them in return a portion of that good seed which sprung up after a long winter, and at the Reformation bore plentiful and prosperous fruit. From Aragon, now a province of Spain, but then a separate kingdom, King Ildefonsus banished them by a severe edict in 1194. This royal mandate characterizes them as, quote, adversaries to the cross of Christ, violators and corrupters of the Christian religion, and enemies of the kingdom, unquote. Orders them to be banished, and decrees the highest penalty against such as remain. It contains at the same time evidence that their numbers were considerable in that country, and that their doctrines had therein obtained a firm footing. The measures, however, which temporal princes employed for oppressing the people of God were mild and humane in comparison with those emanating directly from the court of Rome. The anti-Christian power has been drunk with the blood of the saints. The second beast of apocalyptic vision, the ecclesiastical part of the papacy, is represented as exceeding in cruelty and injustice the first, the secular power of the Roman world. The attempt of this impious system has ever been, by bloody edicts and their barbarous execution, to, quote, wear out the saints, unquote, to root out the woman's seed from the earth. Bitter was the experience which the Waldensian witnesses had of this truth during the long night of their sufferings. In 1192, Innocent III ascended the pontifical throne, and scarcely had he obtained possession of his power till he employed in it cutting off, in the most summary manner, all who held opinions different from those of the Romish hierarchy. The Waldenses felt severely the effects of this rage against the godly. The first efforts of his accursed zeal were directed against their leaders, probably expecting that could he succeed in cutting off the shepherds, the flock would be dispersed. In consequence, many faithful pastors perished in the flames at Nevers and other places in the south of France about the commencement of the 13th century. Various papal emissaries were next employed to travel into the countries throughout which the Waldenses were dispersed, to search out their lurking places, and having discovered them, to bring them before the secular judge for punishment. Among the most noted of those booted missionaries were Guy and Renarius, two monks of Citeaux, and Peter of Castelnau. Urged on by the persecuting spirit of the Roman pontiff, they were intent on their mission, and considerable numbers in the province of Narbonne and the countries adjacent fell the unoffending victims of their artifice and cruelty. The number of witnesses cut off, however, was too small to satisfy the rage of innocent, and the mission for reclaiming or extirpating the heretics did not come up to the sanguine expectations of the court of Rome. Accordingly, two new expedients, unparalleled in the evil inventions that men have sought out, were employed to facilitate the work of destruction. These were the Holy Office, as it is styled by the abettors of the papacy, or the Inquisition, as it is termed according to ordinary usage, and the Crusades, or Holy Wars, and here a footnote. These were persecuted with as much zeal as had been the Crusades against the Mohammedans. The invention of the Inquisition is to be attributed to Dominic, a Spanish priest who is a saint in the Romish calendar, and the founder of the Order of Saint Dominic. The court which he instituted had directly for its object the suppression of heresy and the complete extermination of all that presumed to call in question any of the dogmas of the Church of Rome. The means employed to effect this design were such as suited the infamous purpose. At first, the inquisitors acted in a double capacity, attempting to convince the heretics by argument, and then, if they remained incorrigible, delivering them over to the civil power to be put to death or banished. They had not, in the commencement of their proceedings, tribunals of their own, before which they could bring and condemn persons suspected of heresy. But the civil powers, having, in this time of thick darkness, agreed to give their power to the beast, they found but little difficulty in getting their victims dispatched as they desired. Afterwards they obtained a more regular organization, and were enabled in a more summary manner to effect their purpose. Let it never be said that the Church of Rome has not directly sanctioned persecution. The establishment of the Inquisition is a standing proof against all that interested partisans can advance to the contrary. By an edict of his infallibility, Innocent III, this infernal court was regularly constituted as a chief engine for promoting the schemes of the Popish Church, and this very Dominic, the first inquisitor and prime contriver of the measure, is reckoned a saint in the calendar, and has prayers especially addressed to him in the breviary. The Inquisition, when fully established, was a tremendous instrument for perpetuating the reign of darkness. Its judges were persons taken from the regular clergy of the Church of Rome, and here a footnote. In the Romish hierarchy there are two orders of clergy, the regular, comprehending all the monastic orders, and the secular, comprehending all of the parochial clergy. These two bodies are perfectly distinct from each other, having each its own officers and regulations. Are they not fitly represented by the two horns of the second beast, whose decisions the civil powers were obliged to carry into execution on pain of excommunication? Besides the numerous officers attached to every tribunal, there were vast numbers of familiaries, as they were called, who assumed every guise and acted the part of spies, mingling in all societies, so that a person was never safe from their machinations. Persons accused were brought before the Inquisition on the vaguest suspicion. The witnesses were never confronted. In many cases the crime itself was not declared, but recantation demanded, and the evidence of the son against the father, or the wife against her husband, and of the most notorious characters was admitted. The punishments inflicted were of such a character as to render this court an object of terror wherever it was established. Lengthened confinement in the most noisome dungeons, with confiscation to the church of the person's property, was frequently the award of a crime never proved, and here a footnote. The inquisitors of later days have not fallen below the standard of their predecessors in cruelty, and had they the power, and did the spirit of the age permit it, we have abundant evidence that among the abettors of popery there are many who would gladly revive the summary punishments of other days. a person who was present when the Inquisition was thrown open in 1820 by the order of the Cortes of Madrid, states the following facts. Quote, 21 prisoners were found in it. Not one of them knew the name of the city in which he was. Some had been confined 3 years, some a longer period, and not one knew perfectly the nature of the crime of which he was accused. One of these prisoners had been condemned, and was to have suffered on the following day. His punishment was to be death by the pendulum. The method of thus destroying the victim is as follows. The condemned is fastened on his back in a groove upon a table. Suspended above him is a pendulum, the edge of which is sharp, and which is so constructed as to become longer with every movement. The victim sees this implement of destruction swinging to and fro above him, and at every movement the keen edge approaching nearer and nearer. At length it cuts the skin of his nose, and gradually cuts on until his life is extinct. It may be doubted if the Holy Office ever invented any more humane or speedy method of exterminating heresy or ensuring confiscation. This, let it be remembered, was in the year 1820. See Lorette's History of the Inquisition. Many died by the treatment which they received in prison. Others were reserved for a more public execution. Even after the victim had been inveigled into a recantation, he was, in many instances, led forth before the populace, dressed in a garment painted with the representations of devils, flames, etc., and publicly burnt. The priest singing "Glory to God," and the people in immense multitudes enjoying the spectacle and applauding the action. This was called an aut de fe, or act of faith. The recourse was had to it, not only to cut off such as protested against the wickedness of the Church of Rome, but to strike terror into the hearts of others, to prevent them from forsaking her communion. By this infamous tribunal vast numbers of the Waldenses perished. It is calculated that in 30 years not less than 150,000 were destroyed by this means, for their steadfast adherence to the Word of God and the testimony of Christ.